Imagine watching a news video that seems completely neutral. It's well-produced, delivered in fluent English, and discusses world affairs calmly. But what if that video was quietly created by a foreign government? Welcome to the new battleground of global influence, your YouTube feed. Over the last few months, Google has taken aggressive action to purge what they call coordinated influence operations from platforms like YouTube, Blogger, and Google Ads. The numbers are staggering. Nearly 11,000 YouTube channels were removed just in the second quarter of 2025 alone. These weren't pranksters or click farmers. They were state-affiliated media operations, many tied directly to countries like China and Russia. Their mission? Subtly shape public opinion in favor of authoritarian regimes and against democratic institutions. These channels often looked harmless, sometimes even entertaining, but embedded within the content were key narratives designed to sway your thinking, spark distrust in the West, and promote leaders like Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The average viewer might never know, and that's what makes it so dangerous. In today's hyper-connected world, information warfare isn't declared with bombs or bullets. It's launched through algorithms, likes, and video views. If you're curious how these campaigns operate, who's behind them, and what it means for the integrity of our online spaces, then you're in the right place. Stick around and hit that subscribe button. We're breaking down the full story of the digital propaganda war you didn't even know you were part of. On July 21st, 2025, Google publicly announced a wave of content takedowns that revealed the extent of its ongoing battle against digital propaganda. In Q2 alone, the company removed thousands of YouTube channels, Google ad accounts, and even Blogger blogs, all linked to government-sponsored disinformation campaigns. Leading this effort is the Google Threat Analysis Group, or TAG, a specialized internal team dedicated to identifying and countering nation-backed cyber threats. The announcement wasn't just routine moderation, it was a clear declaration of digital defense. The affected assets weren't small or new. Many had existed for years, accumulating views, followers, and ad revenue. Their content was often presented in a calm, analytical tone, making it hard for the average viewer to distinguish between genuine opinion and state-influenced narrative. These accounts covered everything from international politics and economic development to global conflicts, often weaving in subtle praise for authoritarian leaders and criticism of Western policies. TAG's report explained that the propaganda was designed to appear organic, using tactics like fake personas, bot amplification, and clickbait thumbnails to spread influence. This wasn't disorganized trolling. It was methodical, well-resourced psychological warfare. The report emphasized that as disinformation campaigns evolve, so must detection strategies. Many of these takedowns were made possible through a combination of AI detection systems and manual review by trained analysts. The result is not just a cleaner platform, but a stronger stance against the manipulation of global information spaces. Google's action is a powerful reminder. The war for your mind is being fought in your watch history. Of all the nations involved in this growing web of propaganda, China stands out as the most prolific. According to Google's report, more than 7,700 of the channels removed in the second quarter of 2025 were linked to China. These weren't just low-effort spam accounts. They were coordinated, persistent, and highly strategic. Many of them produced content in both Mandarin and English, aimed at both domestic Chinese-speaking audiences and international viewers. The messaging was subtle but consistent. Praise for the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, glorification of President Xi Jinping, and the projection of China as a peaceful global leader unfairly criticized by Western powers. Videos frequently discussed U.S. foreign policy, international conflicts, and China's economic progress, always casting China in a favorable light. Some content creators posed as independent journalists or global affairs analysts, even adopting American or European-sounding usernames. This tactic was meant to disguise the true origin of the content and increase trust from unsuspecting viewers. By embedding political messaging into what seemed like neutral or informative videos, these channels could quietly influence public perception over time. It wasn't always overt. Sometimes, it was as simple as downplaying controversial topics like the treatment of Uyghurs or the Hong Kong protests, or suggesting that Western democracies are chaotic and unstable compared to China's order. This kind of influence campaign is harder to detect because it doesn't scream propaganda. It whispers it. And in a world saturated with information, a whisper, repeated often enough, can become the voice in your head. If China plays the long game of subtle influence, Russia plays the short game of disruption. In the second quarter of 2025, over 2,000 channels were taken down by Google for being linked to Russian propaganda networks. These campaigns were often loud, multilingual, and inflammatory, designed to provoke, confuse, and divide. Much of the content criticized Ukraine, NATO, and Western governments, painting them as corrupt, aggressive, or hypocritical. Many videos echoed the Kremlin's narrative that Russia is merely defending itself from a hostile West, bent on destroying its culture and sovereignty. Others sought to discredit Ukraine's leadership or cast doubt on the legitimacy of Western support for the Ukrainian resistance. While some of these narratives are familiar remnants of the post-2014 Crimea era, they've adapted to fit new digital formats. Russian-linked channels used memes, short-form videos, and even reaction-style commentary to appeal to younger audiences. They also took advantage of trending hashtags and international tragedies to inject their views into unrelated discussions. In May alone, Google removed 20 YouTube channels, 4 ad accounts, and 1 blogger blog tied directly to RT, Russia's state-controlled media outlet. This was significant because YouTube had already banned RT in 2022 following the Ukraine invasion. These new channels acted as shadow extensions, continuing the same messaging under different branding. The goal wasn't necessarily to convert people to Russia's side. It was to make truth feel relative, facts feel negotiable, and trust in democratic institutions feel fragile. In essence, Russia doesn't just spread lies, it spreads doubt. While China and Russia dominate the conversation around state-backed digital propaganda, they are far from alone. Google's second quarter report revealed that influence campaigns were also traced back to several other countries, including Iran, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Israel, Romania, and even Ghana. Each of these nations had unique agendas, but they all employed the same fundamental tactics, leveraging Google's platforms to influence public discourse and push national interests. For example, Iranian-linked accounts often focused on Middle Eastern geopolitics, portraying Iran as a victim of Western aggression, while painting adversaries like Saudi Arabia and the United States in a negative light. In Azerbaijan's case, content revolved around territorial conflicts and regional politics, especially regarding tensions with Armenia. These channels framed Azerbaijan's government actions as justified and necessary, often vilifying opposition groups or rival states. Turkish-affiliated accounts promoted narratives supportive of President Erdogan's policies, sometimes targeting critics within and outside the country. Meanwhile, some Romanian and Ghanaian channels appeared to push pro-government messaging while attacking journalists or activists. Israel-linked campaigns were more complex, often tied to intelligence-related operations and diplomatic influence. What's alarming is not just the diversity of these campaigns, but the fact that so many countries with differing ideologies and goals now see YouTube, Blogger, and Google Ads as critical tools for information warfare. This shows a seismic shift in how power is projected in the 21st century. Statecraft is no longer just about military presence or economic pressure. It's about shaping minds, shifting narratives, and silently planting ideological seeds across the digital landscape. And most users have no idea it's happening right in their notifications tab. The work done by Google's threat analysis group, TAG, didn't begin with propaganda. When the team was first formed in late 2019, their focus was largely on countering cyber attacks, phishing schemes, and hacking attempts by state-backed actors. Their targets included foreign spies attempting to breach Gmail accounts, steal confidential data, or compromise Google infrastructure. But as the internet evolved, so did the threats. TAG began noticing a new pattern. Foreign actors weren't just trying to steal secrets. They were trying to shape stories. YouTube videos, blog posts, comment sections, and advertisements became tools for subtle ideological warfare. Instead of stealing information, these campaigns were injecting it. Strategically curated content designed to manipulate public perception. By early 2020, TAG's scope had expanded dramatically. The team began working with machine learning systems to detect patterns of coordinated behavior. They built systems that could track when multiple accounts were posting similar content, using similar keywords, or referencing the same obscure news outlets, all indicators of a coordinated influence operation. Manual review teams were trained to identify state-backed messaging techniques. In many cases, TAG worked closely with national security agencies around the world to share intelligence and coordinate responses. What began as a cybersecurity measure has grown into a full-scale effort to preserve the integrity of global information networks. Today, TAG is one of the most important teams at Google, not because they protect passwords, but because they protect the very nature of what people believe to be true. And in the information age, truth is power. Before the sweeping crackdown in the second quarter, Google had already raised eyebrows with its Q1 purge earlier this year. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, the company removed more than 23,000 YouTube channels and a large number of associated assets, such as ads accounts and blogs. The sheer volume stunned observers. While it's easy to imagine this as a one-off response to new threats, the data told a different story. This was the continuation of an entrenched, large-scale war on coordinated digital manipulation. Many of these channels had been operating for years, steadily amassing viewers and trust by uploading regular content that seemed informative, even benign. But beneath the surface was a calculated effort to build credibility before slowly injecting state-sponsored narratives. A significant number of the accounts were linked to China and Russia, though others had connections to Iran and additional unnamed state actors. This pattern of deep infiltration is known in threat intelligence circles as patience propaganda, an approach that doesn't rely on shock value, but instead on repetition, familiarity, and subtle influence over time. One account might post cooking recipes, travel vlogs, or tech reviews for months before gradually introducing political takes wrapped in relatable content. These findings suggested a paradigm shift. Digital propaganda was no longer about crude manipulation. It had become psychological conditioning. Google's Q1 purge wasn't just a cleanup. It was a necessary reset of a landscape that had been silently weaponized. It also raised a difficult question. How many such networks still remain undetected? And how many viewers have already been influenced without ever realizing they were targets? At the heart of these influence operations lies a common objective: destabilize and divide Western democracies. While some campaigns focus on boosting national image or defending foreign policy, many others go further, targeting specific Western audiences with tailored content meant to exploit political and social fractures. Google's report revealed that a significant portion of the removed channels published content in English, Spanish, German, and French, languages that broaden the reach into the US, Canada, Europe, and even Latin America. These videos often touched on hot-button issues like race relations, immigration, income inequality, public health, and government trust. In many cases, the strategy wasn't to present a clear argument, but to amplify existing frustrations. Some channels would impersonate social justice advocates, while others posed as conservative commentators. But behind the different faces was the same goal: polarization. The aim was to encourage citizens to distrust each other, question their leaders, and disengage from civic processes. This tactic is particularly effective in countries with open digital environments, where freedom of speech is protected and content moderation is often minimal. Ironically, the openness of democratic societies becomes their greatest vulnerability. These campaigns don't need to be persuasive. They just need to be divisive. The more chaotic the political climate becomes, the easier it is for authoritarian regimes to point to the dysfunction and say, "Look at what democracy produces." Google's crackdown is not just about platform policy. It's a defense of democratic resilience in the face of digital sabotage. And it's a stark reminder that the next election could be shaped not just by candidates, but by invisible hands overseas. Despite YouTube's formal ban on RT, Russia Today, channels in March 2022, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Google's findings from 2025 show that RT's voice never really disappeared. It simply morphed. In May 2025 alone, Google removed 20 YouTube channels, 4 ad accounts, and 1 Blogger blog directly linked to Russian state-controlled media like RT. These were not obvious clones of the original RT channels. Instead, they operated like sleeper cells, posing as independent news sources, commentary channels, or alternative media voices. Their aesthetics varied widely. Some mimicked Western podcast formats, while others took the form of casual vloggers reacting to world news. But the content told a different story. These accounts peddled familiar Kremlin narratives. Ukraine as a failed state riddled with neo-Nazi sympathizers, NATO as a warmongering alliance, and the West as hypocritical and decaying. They questioned the legitimacy of Western elections, ridiculed climate policies, and spread fear about immigration, all while never overtly branding themselves as Russian. The sophistication of these shadow channels was alarming. They mastered platform optimization, clever thumbnails, engaging titles, and comment interaction to build credibility and visibility. Some had already gathered tens of thousands of followers before removal. Their strategy reflected a shift from direct propaganda to covert infiltration. Influence the narrative not through dominance, but through mimicry. By blending in with grassroots content creators, they gained trust from unsuspecting viewers who had no reason to suspect state involvement. The lesson here is chilling. Banning a name doesn't ban a narrative. RT's ideas lived on, not through official channels, but through digital phantoms designed to be indistinguishable from real voices. And for many users, the difference was undetectable. Not all propaganda needs to be digital. China's information strategy also extends into the physical realm, particularly through educational outreach. For years, the Chinese government funded Confucius institutes across universities worldwide, branding them as cultural and language centers meant to foster mutual understanding. But critics, including the U.S. State Department and the FBI, warned that these institutes served a deeper agenda, promoting pro-China narratives while suppressing critical discourse. By 2022, several U.S. states, including Utah, took decisive action. Confucius institutes were shut down across university campuses after being flagged as propaganda vehicles for the Chinese Communist Party. While publicly framed as cultural initiatives, these institutes operated with funding and oversight from Beijing's Ministry of Education. Their materials were often censored to avoid sensitive topics, such as the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Hong Kong democracy protests, or the treatment of Uyghur Muslims. Professors reported pressure to align curricula with party-approved messaging. In Utah, the closures coincided with broader legislative action aimed at limiting foreign adversary influence, including laws preventing Chinese-owned entities from purchasing land near strategic locations like airports. This shift from soft diplomacy to policy enforcement reflected growing bipartisan concern about China's global intentions. Although many Confucius institutes were shuttered, the narrative battle didn't end. It simply evolved. Today, similar messaging is found on TikTok, YouTube, and community blogs, reaching even more people, more quickly. The digital arena replaced the classroom, and for every shuttered institute, 1,000 videos now whisper the same message. China is misunderstood, and Western democracies are flawed. It's no longer just a matter of what's taught, it's about what's believed. As Google's threat analysis group, TAG, continues to tackle coordinated propaganda, a new challenge looms on the horizon: artificial intelligence. In the past, state-sponsored campaigns relied on human labor, scriptwriters, editors, presenters, and translators. But with the rise of generative AI tools, those barriers are vanishing. Governments and their affiliates can now produce convincing video content, write persuasive articles, and even generate synthetic voices that mimic real influencers, all with minimal human oversight. This evolution has already begun. Analysts are seeing an uptick in AI-generated political videos featuring avatars that read out propaganda messages in perfectly enunciated English, Mandarin, or Arabic. These avatars look indistinguishable from human vloggers, and their scripts are laced with narratives that subtly push pro-government positions or discredit adversaries. What makes AI-driven disinformation especially dangerous is scale and speed. One well-trained model can pump out hundreds of unique videos or articles a day, optimized for different demographics and cultures. It's no longer just about infiltration. It's about saturation. The more content a propaganda network can flood into the public sphere, the harder it is for truth to rise above the noise. Even Google's current systems, while powerful, are struggling to keep up. AI-generated videos often bypass detection tools because they lack the telltale signs of human coordination. Worse yet, some of this content is so polished that viewers assume it comes from a verified, neutral source. As AI continues to evolve, so must our awareness. The next phase of this digital war won't just be fought by trolls or hackers. It will be waged by algorithms, trained to deceive with terrifying precision. One question many ask is, why do these propaganda channels work so well, and how do they keep growing before they're caught? The answer lies not only in strategy, but in the economic incentives built into digital platforms. YouTube and other Google products reward watch time, engagement, and shareability. Channels that stir controversy or ride trending topics are more likely to be promoted by algorithms, regardless of their origins. State-backed channels understand this and exploit it ruthlessly. By disguising their content as independent or alternative media, they tap into existing distrust in mainstream narratives. Add in emotional hooks, fear, outrage, patriotism, and these videos become irresistible to certain audiences. The more engagement a video receives, the more ad revenue it generates. And yes, many of these channels were monetized. That means foreign governments may have been funding their campaigns not just with budgets, but with YouTube's own payouts. In Q1 and Q2, TAG identified dozens of takedowns involving monetized propaganda assets, which had earned real money while manipulating global perception. This financial loop is alarming. It suggests a feedback system where disinformation doesn't just spread, it profits. Platforms like Google are now racing to adjust monetization policies, limiting the ability of suspicious networks to generate income. Still, the battle is far from over. Disinformation agents are learning how to work around filters, create parallel monetized channels, and use cryptocurrency to obscure funding trails. In short, propaganda is no longer a cost center for regimes. It's a self-sustaining, revenue-generating machine. And as long as there's profit in propaganda, there's incentive to keep the machine running. While companies like Google lead the technical fight against digital disinformation, the US government has begun reinforcing its own defenses through legislation and policy. The growing concern over foreign influence, especially from China and Russia, has pushed state and federal leaders to act. One major move came from the Department of Defense, DoD, in July 2025, when Microsoft, one of the Pentagon's major cloud contractors, announced it would stop using engineers based in China to support its US government systems. This was a significant policy shift. Microsoft's chief communications officer, Frank Shaw, stated that the change was necessary to ensure that no China-based engineering teams were involved in maintaining critical defense infrastructure. This wasn't just about data safety, it was about trust. In sensitive national security environments, even the smallest possibility of foreign influence or surveillance is considered an unacceptable risk. The announcement came on the heels of increasing reports that adversarial nations were not just targeting the public, but also attempting to infiltrate technical infrastructure through service contracts and digital backdoors. Meanwhile, individual states like Utah took legislative steps to address economic influence. Governor Spencer Cox, for instance, blocked a Chinese-owned company from purchasing land near a local airport, citing a new state law that bans land ownership by entities classified as foreign adversaries. These moves reflect a broader shift in the perception of national security. It's no longer just about soldiers and spies. It's about data, property, influence, and access. As foreign powers move to control narratives, platforms, and even physical assets in Western countries, the U.S. government is beginning to catch up. But the race to stay ahead is far from won. Perhaps the most insidious impact of foreign propaganda isn't on elections or public policy. It's on the human psyche. Over time, repeated exposure to manipulated narratives erodes something vital: trust. Trust in institutions, trust in journalism, trust in your neighbors. This is the real goal of disinformation campaigns, not to persuade, but to fracture. When people begin to question whether any information is reliable, they retreat into echo chambers or apathy. That fragmentation of social cohesion benefits authoritarian regimes, A disoriented public is easier to manipulate. Google's removal of nearly 34,000 channels in the first half of 2025 alone reveals how widespread and entrenched these psychological attacks have become. The campaigns didn't always push a consistent ideology. In fact, they often contradicted themselves. But that's the point. Confusion is the strategy. One Russian-linked video might glorify the US military. Another might portray it as imperialist. One Chinese-affiliated blog might praise free speech. Another subtly ridicules it. The inconsistency isn't a flaw. It's a tactic to muddy the waters. Viewers begin to wonder, what's true anymore? And when that question becomes too overwhelming, many stop trying to find the answer. The decline in public trust leads to the decay of democratic processes. People disengage from voting, stop reading the news, or fall prey to extreme ideologies that promise clarity in a world of noise. That's the ultimate success of propaganda, not convincing people to adopt new beliefs, but convincing them that no belief is worth holding. And in this silent psychological war, every confused scroll, every doubting glance is a victory for the adversary. As we close this deep dive into the digital battleground of 2025, one thing becomes clear. The war for influence is no longer fought on the front lines of geography. It's fought in feeds, search results, video suggestions, and recommended reading lists. Google's takedown of nearly 34,000 propaganda-linked assets this year was not just a tech company's policy decision. It was a declaration of resistance against invisible forces attempting to reshape global consciousness. And while this round was a victory for transparency and integrity, the battle is far from over. Disinformation is adaptive, well-funded, and often legally elusive. As long as there are platforms to exploit and people to persuade, propaganda will continue to evolve. The future of this war lies not just in detection, but in education. Viewers, readers, and users must become more discerning. Schools must teach media literacy. Platforms must prioritize authenticity over virality. Governments must work with tech companies not just after the damage is done, but proactively, investing in infrastructure that recognizes disinformation not as a nuisance, but as a national threat. And what about us, ordinary internet users? We carry more responsibility than we think. Every click, every share, every comment can amplify or silence narratives. We can be participants in a truth-based ecosystem or unwitting pawns in someone else's strategy. The choice isn't just in the hands of AI or algorithms, it's in ours. So as you close this video or article, ask yourself, what will you do with the awareness you now have? If this story helped illuminate a part of the digital world you didn't know existed, subscribe, share, and stay informed. Because in the war of information, awareness is our first line of defense.